Don't let her touch the contract. The words came out in Japanese, sharp and dismissive. Marcus Wellington slid the leather portfolio across the table at the Azure Room, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, putting distance between the documents and the black waitress refilling his water glass. 28-year-old Grace Morrison kept her expression neutral. Professional. Invisible. She'd perfected this act over 3 years of serving Chicago's elite, the tech moguls, the hedge fund managers, the self-made billionaires who spoke in foreign languages thinking nobody could understand them. They were always wrong about Grace. Marcus continued in Japanese to the 5 investors seated around him in the private dining room. He told them the merger was guaranteed. Tomorrow morning at 9, they'd finalize the deal with Chen Technologies, a Chinese conglomerate. $1.3 billion. The biggest acquisition of his career. Everything was perfect. If you've ever been underestimated because of your job, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Grace poured the water with steady hands, her movements efficient and practiced. She'd served this room 100 times. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. Crystal chandeliers that cost more than most cars. Tables where deals worth more than small countries changed hands over appetizers. The man to Marcus's right, a Russian oligarch named Viktor Volkov, switched to Russian and made a crude joke about American waitresses being attractive but empty-headed. The table erupted in laughter. Grace's hand didn't shake. Not even a tremor. But inside, her mind was racing. Because while they'd been joking and bragging in 3 different languages, she'd caught something. A detail mentioned in Mandarin by the Chinese representative. A clause reference that didn't match what Marcus had said in Japanese. A discrepancy that made her blood run cold. The contract they were celebrating had a fatal flaw. Marcus leaned back in his chair, swirling his $50 glass of scotch, completely at ease. He switched to Mandarin and told the Chinese investors that American regulators were easy to manipulate. That his legal team had structured everything perfectly. That this deal would make them all rich beyond imagination. Grace moved to clear the appetizer plates, her eyes briefly scanning the contract portfolio that Marcus had left at the edge of the table. She could see the header. Section 7, Paragraph 4.2, Foreign Subsidiary Transfer Protocols. Her stomach dropped. She'd seen this kind of clause before. 2 years ago, when she'd been Dr. Grace Morrison, the youngest partner at Morrison & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious international law firms. When she'd specialized in cross-border mergers and acquisitions. When she'd spoken 9 languages and negotiated billion-dollar deals from a corner office overlooking Lake Michigan. Before a senior partner's false accusation had destroyed everything. Marcus's voice cut through her thoughts. He was speaking in Mandarin again, this time directly insulting Grace. He told his investors that this particular waitress had probably never left Illinois. That she probably didn't even know other countries existed. That people like her lived in small worlds with small dreams. The other men chuckled, their voices carrying that particular brand of cruelty that came from people who'd never been underestimated in their lives. Grace set down the plates with deliberate care. She could walk away. Should walk away. These arrogant men deserved whatever disaster they'd built for themselves. But the flaw she'd spotted wasn't just a technicality. It was catastrophic. If that deal closed tomorrow with that clause intact, Marcus Wellington would lose everything. Not just the $1 billion. His entire company. His reputation. Everything he'd built over 20 years. And Viktor Volkov knew. She could see it in his eyes. The way he kept glancing at Marcus with barely concealed satisfaction. This wasn't an accident. This was a trap. Grace looked at the contract one more time. At Marcus Wellington's oblivious face. At Victor's predatory smile. Then she made a decision that would change everything. She set down her water pitcher, smoothed her uniform, and spoke. In perfect Mandarin. With a Beijing accent so flawless it could have come from a native speaker. Mr. Wellington, she said, her voice calm and professional, I couldn't help but overhear your discussion about the merger. And I need to tell you something important. The room went absolutely silent. Marcus's glass stopped halfway to his lips. His mouth opened slightly. His investors stared at her like she'd just materialized out of thin air. Grace continued in Mandarin, speaking directly to the Chinese representative. The subsidiary transfer protocol in Section 7, paragraph 4.2 contains a reciprocal liability clause that contradicts the indemnification agreement in the English version. If this deal closes as written, Mr. Wellington's company becomes legally responsible for all of Chen Technologies' existing debts and pending litigation in 6 countries. The Chinese investor's face went pale. Grace switched to Japanese, addressing Marcus directly. You said your legal team reviewed everything. But did they review all the language versions? Because the Japanese addendum has different termination conditions than the English master agreement. You think you're buying a company. But according to the Japanese version, you're actually being acquired. Marcus finally found his voice. What are you? And in Russian, Grace said, switching languages again and looking directly at Viktor Volkov, there's an interesting clause about dispute resolution that gives Mr. Volkov's shell companies control of your intellectual property if any misunderstanding arises during the integration process. Subscribe now because what happens next will blow your mind. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. Victor's face had gone from smug to furious. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Who is she? He demanded in Russian. How does she? You're the lawyer, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, also in Russian. The one from Morrison and Associates. The one I had destroyed 2 years ago. He looked at Marcus. She knows everything. She's seen the trap. Marcus was staring at Grace like he'd never seen her before. You speak, how many languages do you speak? 9, Grace said simply, switching back to English. And I know exactly what's in that contract because I used to write them. Before your friend here destroyed my career for exposing his company's fraud. She looked at the contract portfolio, then back at Marcus. That deal you're celebrating? If you sign it tomorrow morning, you'll be bankrupt within 6 months. Victor designed it that way. It's not a merger. It's a hostile takeover disguised in 3 languages so your lawyers wouldn't catch it. The private dining room felt like it had run out of air. Marcus set down his glass very carefully. You're telling me I'm about to lose everything. $1.3 billion. Your company. Your technology patents. Everything. Grace met his eyes. And he's counting on you being too arrogant to listen to a waitress. Victor was already pulling out his phone, speaking rapidly in Russian to someone. Probably his security team. Probably calling them to handle the problem Grace had just become. Marcus Wellington stared at Grace Morrison for a long moment. Grace picked up the contract portfolio, flipped to Section 7, and started reading in Mandarin, Japanese, and Russian simultaneously, showing him the discrepancies that his $1 million legal team had completely missed. And Viktor Volkov realized that his perfect trap had just been exposed by the woman he thought he destroyed forever. Marcus Wellington didn't follow Grace into the kitchen immediately. First, he watched Viktor Volkov and his investors scramble to leave the Azure room, their faces tight with barely controlled rage. Viktor had made one phone call in Russian, something about containing the situation, before storming out without paying the $15,000 dinner bill. Then Marcus picked up the contract portfolio that had nearly destroyed him, tucked it under his arm, and walked through the door marked "Staff Only." The kitchen was chaos. Chefs shouting orders. Plates clattering. The smell of seared duck and truffle risotto thick in the air. Grace stood at the industrial sink washing her hands, her back to him, shoulders tense. Dr. Morrison, Marcus said. Grace turned. It's just Grace. I lost the doctor title when I lost my law license. That's not what I found. Marcus held up his phone. I had my assistant pull your file while you were walking back here. Dr. Grace Morrison. Yale Law. Graduated top of your class. Youngest partner in Morrison and Associates history. Specializing in international mergers and acquisitions. Fluent in, he scrolled, 9 languages. Then 2 years ago, suddenly disbarred pending an ethics investigation that's still somehow unresolved. Grace dried her hands on a towel, her expression unreadable. Viktor Volkov told you I'm a fraud, right? That I fabricated evidence. Made false accusations against innocent clients. He did. And you believe him? Marcus studied her face for a long moment. I watched you read a 300-page contract section in 3 languages in under 90 seconds and spot discrepancies my $1 million legal team missed. So no, I don't believe him. Grace's shoulders relaxed slightly. Smart man. How did you end up working here? Same way everyone ends up working anywhere after they've been professionally destroyed, Grace said. I needed money. Nobody would hire a disbarred lawyer. The Azure room doesn't do background checks on servers. I've been invisible for 2 years. Marcus set the contract portfolio on a stainless steel prep table. I need your help. No. You haven't heard my offer. I don't need to. Grace turned back toward the dining room. I warned you about the contract. That's all I can do. Good luck tomorrow. $500,000. Grace stopped walking. Review the entire contract tonight, Marcus continued. Every version. Every language. Find every trap Victor buried in there. Help me restructure the deal so I don't lose my company. I'll pay you $500,000. Cash. Tomorrow afternoon. Would you risk everything to help someone who just insulted you moments ago? Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Grace turned around slowly. You just spent 20 minutes mocking me in languages you thought I didn't understand. Called me empty-headed. Uneducated. Said people like me live in small worlds. And now you want my help. Marcus had the decency to look ashamed. You're right. I was arrogant. Cruel. Inexcusably rude. I apologize. Your apology means nothing to me. Then take the money as compensation for my stupidity. Grace walked back to the prep table and opened the contract portfolio. She flipped through pages, her eyes scanning rapidly. After 2 minutes of complete silence, she looked up at Marcus with an expression that made his blood run cold. It's worse than I thought. What do you mean? This isn't just about bankrupting you. Grace pulled out a section marked with Chinese characters. Chen Technologies isn't a tech company. It's a front. The subsidiary structure here, she pointed to specific clauses, is designed to move money through 6 countries without triggering reporting requirements. This is money laundering on an international scale. Marcus felt the room tilt. That's impossible. We vetted. Your team vetted the English version. The sanitized version Victor wanted you to see. Grace switched to another section. But the Mandarin addendum references contracts with 3 companies currently under sanctions by the U.S. Treasury. And this paragraph in the Russian version mentions strategic materials being shipped to conflict zones. What kind of materials? Weapons, Grace said flatly. You think you're buying a cybersecurity company. But what you're actually doing is providing cover for an international arms trafficking operation. Victor's been planning this for years. The kitchen noise faded into background static. Marcus stared at the contract like it had transformed into a live grenade. If I sign this tomorrow. You don't just lose your money, Grace interrupted. You become complicit in violating international sanctions. Arms trafficking. Money laundering. You'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Marcus sat down heavily on a kitchen stool. 20 years of building his company. His reputation. His life's work. All of it about to be destroyed by a contract he'd celebrated 30 minutes ago. Why? He asked. Why would Victor do this? Grace's expression hardened. Because 3 years ago, when I was still a lawyer, I exposed his company for fraud. Cost him $200 million in settlements. He couldn't get to me directly, too public, too risky. So he destroyed my career instead. Had a senior partner at my firm fabricate an ethics complaint. Paid off witnesses. Made sure I'd never practice law again. And now he's using my deal to launder weapons money while framing me for it, Marcus said slowly. Revenge and profit in one move. He's very efficient. Marcus looked at Grace, really looked at her for the first time. Not a waitress. Not invisible. But a brilliant lawyer who'd lost everything fighting the same man who was about to destroy him. I'll pay you $1 million, he said. Help me stop this. Not just save my company, but burn Victor's entire operation to the ground. Grace started to answer, but the kitchen door burst open. The Azure Room's manager, a thin man named Gerald who'd always treated Grace with barely concealed contempt, stood there with his face red and furious. Morrison, he shouted. What the hell do you think you're doing? Mr. Volkov just called. He said you harassed him and his associates. Said you made accusations and disrupted their business dinner. Gerald pointed toward the dining room. Get your things. You're fired. Security will escort you out. Subscribe now to see what happens when Grace loses everything for telling the truth. Where are you watching from? Comment below. Grace opened her mouth to respond, but Marcus stood up first. She's not going anywhere, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. And you're not firing her. Gerald sputtered. Mr. Wellington, I appreciate your patronage, but this employee just saved me from signing a fraudulent contract that would have destroyed my company. She's also the most qualified international lawyer in Chicago. And as of right now, she's working for me. Sir, she's a waitress. She's Dr. Grace Morrison, Marcus interrupted. And you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating people. He turned to Grace. The signing is at 9 tomorrow morning. That gives us 10 hours. My office or yours? Grace looked at Gerald's shocked face. At the other kitchen staff watching with wide eyes. At Marcus Wellington offering her a way back into the life she'd lost. I don't have an office anymore, she said quietly. Remember? You do now. Grace picked up the contract portfolio. After 2 years of hiding, of being invisible, of accepting that her career was over, she was finally about to fight back. Your office, she said. And I'll need access to international law databases, translation software, and very strong coffee. They walked toward the kitchen exit together. Gerald was still stammering something about protocols and proper procedures. But as they reached the door, Marcus's head of security burst through it, his face urgent. Sir, we have a situation. Victor Volkov's people are in the parking garage. They're blocking both exits. And they're asking specifically for Dr. Morrison. Grace and Marcus exchanged looks. Victor wasn't going to let her expose him twice. Back exit, Marcus said immediately. My car's in the loading zone. They ran. Behind them, Grace heard Gerald shouting about unpaid bills and damaged reputations. But ahead of her, for the first time in 2 years, was a chance at justice. Even if it meant running for her life to get it. Marcus's driver took 3 evasive turns through downtown Chicago before anyone spoke. Grace sat in the back of the armored Mercedes, still wearing her waitress uniform, watching through tinted windows as the city blurred past. Her hands had finally started shaking, adrenaline catching up with her brain's decision to blow up her safe, invisible life. They're not following us, Marcus's head of security said from the front seat. His name was Davis, ex-Secret Service, and he'd managed to get them out of the Azure room's loading dock 60 seconds before Victor's men arrived. "They don't need to follow us," Grace said quietly. "Victor knows where we're going. Your office. It's the only place in Chicago with the resources to review that contract before morning." Marcus looked at her. "You think he'll come after us there?" "I think Viktor Volkov spent 3 years planning this trap. And I just walked into his perfectly constructed scheme and exposed it in 3 languages in front of 6 witnesses. So yes, he'll come after us. Wellington Tower has excellent security." "So did Morrison and Associates," Grace said. "Victor got to me anyway." The car turned onto East Wacker Drive. Marcus's headquarters, Wellington Tower, rose 47 stories above the Chicago River, all glass and steel, lit up like a beacon against the night sky. At 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, the building should have been nearly empty. They pulled into the private underground garage. Davis did a full sweep before letting them exit the vehicle. The elevator ride to the 47th floor took 90 seconds. Nobody spoke. Marcus's executive suite looked exactly like Grace remembered from her own life, before everything fell apart. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Mahogany furniture that cost more than cars. That particular smell of expensive leather and filtered air that only existed in corner offices. "Conference room is through here," Marcus said, leading her to a space dominated by a table long enough to seat 20 people. He pulled out the contract portfolio and set it on the polished surface. "What do you need?" "Everything," Grace said, her lawyer's mind automatically shifting into gear. "Access to Westlaw and LexisNexis for international precedent research. Translation software for verification, though I won't need it for the languages I speak. The original merger memorandum. All addendums. Any side letters or supplementary agreements. Email correspondence related to the deal. And about 6 pots of coffee." Marcus pulled out his phone and started making calls. Within 20 minutes, Grace had 3 computer screens set up, access to every legal database in North America, and a cup of coffee that actually tasted like it cost $50. She dove into the contract like a drowning person finding air. 847 pages. 17 different sections. Versions in English, Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, Russian, Arabic, and German. Every language version supposedly saying the same thing. They didn't. If you've ever had to work all night to fix someone else's catastrophic mistake, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Grace worked in complete silence for the first hour, her eyes scanning pages at speeds that made Marcus uncomfortable. She switched between languages without thinking, reading a section in Mandarin, cross-referencing it in Russian, checking legal precedents in English. "How did I miss this?" Marcus finally asked, watching her work. He'd pulled up a chair across the table, his expensive suit jacket discarded, tie loosened, looking more human than he had in the restaurant. "You didn't miss it," Grace said without looking up. "Victor designed it this way. Each language version looks legitimate on its own. It's only when you compare them side by side, when you understand the linguistic nuances and legal frameworks of 6 different countries, that you see the trap." She pulled up a section on the middle screen. "Look at this. The English version says, joint venture with shared governance. Sounds fair, right?" Marcus nodded. But the Mandarin version uses a term that translates more accurately as subordinate partnership with advisory role. It's subtle. Your English-speaking lawyers wouldn't catch it because they'd assume the translations are accurate. And Chin Technologies lawyers could always claim it was a translation error if you figured it out later. How many of these discrepancies are there? Grace's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I've found 43 so far. I'm only on page 200. Marcus leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. "My legal team reviewed this for 6 weeks. Your legal team speaks English. Maybe some Spanish. They relied on professional translators who Victor probably paid off or replaced with his own people. Grace finally looked up at him. This is how sophisticated financial fraud works, Mr. Wellington. It doesn't look like fraud. It looks like bureaucracy and translation errors and international business complexity. Call me Marcus. Why? Because you're saving my life right now. Seems like we should be on a first-name basis. Grace almost smiled. Almost. Then she went back to the contract. At 2 in the morning, she switched to the Arabic version and found something that made her stand up so fast her chair rolled backward. Oh no. What? Marcus was instantly alert, coffee cup forgotten. Grace pulled up 3 screens side by side, Arabic, Russian, and English versions of Section 12. It's not just money laundering and sanctions violations. Victor's using your technology patents as collateral for loans from banks that don't exist. What does that mean? It means Chin Technologies, Victor's shell company, is borrowing money against intellectual property they don't own yet. Your technology. Your innovations. Once the merger closes, those loans become your responsibility. Loans to entities that are fronts for criminal organizations in 4 countries. Marcus's face had gone pale. How much money? Grace did the math in her head, converting currencies. $800 million. Owed to Russian organized crime, a Chinese triad, and 2 Middle Eastern groups currently on terrorist watch lists. Subscribe now because what happens next will make you question everything about international business. Where are you watching from? Comment below. If I sign this deal, you become responsible for $800 million in debt to international criminal organizations, Grace finished. They'll own you. Own your company. And when you can't pay, which you won't be able to, they'll take everything. Your patents, your research, your technology. Victor gets to destroy you and deliver your cybersecurity innovations to people who will use them to attack governments worldwide. The conference room felt like all the air had been sucked out. Marcus walked to the windows, staring out at Chicago's nighttime skyline. How long have you been working? Grace checked her watch. 3 hours. How much have you reviewed? About 40%. And you've already found enough to prove Victor's trying to destroy me, violate international sanctions, and fund terrorism? Yes. Marcus turned back to face her. What else are you going to find in the other 60%? I'm honestly afraid to know. They stared at each other for a long moment. 2 people who'd been on opposite sides of a restaurant table 5 hours ago, one mocking, one invisible, now bound together by a contract that could bring down governments. Grace, Marcus said quietly. The story about how you lost your law license. Victor said you fabricated evidence against a client. What really happened? Grace set down the coffee cup she'd been holding. 3 years ago, I was doing due diligence on a merger similar to this one. European energy company buying an American tech firm. Victor was on the board of the European company. I found discrepancies in their environmental impact reports. Falsified data. Evidence they were dumping toxic waste in violation of international treaties. You reported it. I reported it. Cost Victor's company $200 million in fines and settlements. He couldn't attack me directly, too public. So he went after my reputation instead. Paid a senior partner at my firm to file an ethics complaint. Found witnesses who'd testify I'd falsified my own evidence. Buried me in legal proceedings that have been pending for 2 years while my savings ran out and my career died. Why didn't you fight back? With what money? Grace's voice was bitter. Legal defense costs millions. Victor made sure I was blacklisted. No firm would hire me. No one would represent me. I had a choice, spend everything I had fighting a battle I'd probably lose, or survive. I chose survival. Until tonight. Until tonight, Grace agreed. When I saw him about to do the same thing to you that he did to me. And I couldn't stay silent. Marcus walked back to the table and sat down across from her. I need to tell you something. Before this goes any further. Before you risk your life helping me. What? My attorney, Richard Chen, been with my company for 12 years, he's the one who recommended this merger. Introduced me to Chen Technologies. Vouched for Victor personally. Grace's stomach dropped. Marcus, when did Richard make this recommendation? 8 months ago. Why? Because if Richard's been working with Victor for 8 months, he's been compromised. Paid off. Or threatened. Which means Victor has someone inside your company feeding him information. Someone who knows your security protocols. Your schedule. Your vulnerabilities. As if on cue, all 3 computer screens went black. The lights in the conference room flickered once, twice, then died completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Davis burst through the door, weapon drawn. Sir, we have a breach. Someone's disabled the building's security system. They're in the stairwells. Coming up from underground parking. Grace and Marcus locked eyes in the crimson emergency lighting. Victor's here, she whispered. And they were trapped on the 47th floor with only one way down. Grace grabbed the laptop with the contract files while Davis barricaded the conference room door with the 20-person table. How many? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. Davis pressed his earpiece, listening to chatter from the building's compromised security system. At least 8 hostiles. Professional. Military gear. Coming up through both stairwells on the north and south sides. They've cut power to the elevators. Call the police. Already did. Response time is 12 minutes. We don't have 12 minutes. Grace's mind raced through the building's layout. She'd been here once before, years ago, for a deposition in a case she'd won. Wellington Tower had 2 emergency stairwells, 1 service elevator that required a key card, and maintenance access to the HVAC system on every 5th floor. The service elevator, she said. Does it have independent power? Marcus shook his head. Battery backup for emergencies, but it'll only take us down 10 floors before it stops. We'd still be 37 floors up with nowhere to go. What about the HVAC access? Davis looked at her like she'd grown a second head. The ventilation shafts. You want to crawl through 47 floors of ductwork. I want to get to the mechanical room on the 42nd floor. There's a maintenance ladder that goes straight down to parking level 2. Used it during a building inspection 3 years ago for a property dispute case. Marcus stared at her. You remember building schematics from 3 years ago? I remember everything, Grace said. It wasn't a boast. It was just fact. Photographic memory had made law school easy and her career meteoric, until Victor had weaponized it against her, claiming she'd fabricated documents that she'd simply memorized. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Voices speaking Russian. If you were trapped 47 floors up with armed men hunting you, what would you do? Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Davis switched to German, presumably thinking it would confuse anyone listening. The HVAC access is in the north corridor. We'd have to get past whoever's coming up the north stairwell. Grace responded in German, her accent flawless. How many in the north stairwell? 4 confirmed. Maybe 5. And the south? At least 4. They're trying to trap us. Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his face went white. It's Richard. My attorney. Grace grabbed his wrist before he could answer. Don't. If he's working with Victor, that call is tracking our location. He's my lawyer. My friend for 12 years. And I was a respected attorney until Victor bought the right people, Grace said. Trust is a currency. Victor deals in it. Marcus stared at his phone as it rang 3 more times, then went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text appeared. Marcus, I know you're in the building with that woman. Victor explained everything. She's mentally unstable. Obsessed with him since he exposed her fraud. Let me help you before she gets you killed. See? Grace said bitterly. That's how character assassination works. Turn the victim into the villain. Make the truth sound like delusion. The conference room door handle rattled. Then a voice called out in English with a Russian accent. Dr. Morrison, we know you're in there. Mr. Volkov just wants to talk. No one needs to get hurt. Grace recognized that voice. Dmitry Sokolov. Victor's head of security. She'd dealt with him 3 years ago during the investigation. She responded in Russian, loud enough to carry through the door. Tell Victor that if he wants to talk, he can do it in a federal courtroom after I deliver 847 pages of evidence to the FBI. Silence. Then Dmitry spoke again, still in Russian. You're making this harder than it needs to be. The laptop you're holding is the only copy of your so-called evidence. Give it to us, and we'll let you both walk out of here. Lying in Russian doesn't make it more believable, Grace called back. A gunshot exploded through the door lock. Davis returned fire through the wood, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Grace and Marcus hit the floor. We need to move now. Davis shouted in German. Grace grabbed the laptop and Marcus's arm. Davis kicked open a side door that led to Marcus's private office, one more layer between them and Victor's men. They ran through it into a hallway bathed in red emergency lighting. The HVAC access panel was 50 feet ahead. 50 feet of exposed hallway with no cover. Behind them, the conference room door shattered under concentrated gunfire. Run! Davis commanded. They ran. Grace's waitress uniform wasn't designed for sprinting. Her shoes, practical flats meant for 8-hour shifts, slipped on the polished floor. Marcus grabbed her arm, keeping her upright. Davis covered their rear, firing twice at shapes emerging from Marcus's office. They reached the HVAC panel. Marcus ripped it open. Inside was a narrow shaft with metal handholds leading down into darkness. You first, Marcus said to Grace. The laptop goes with you. You're the only one who knows what's in that contract. Grace stuffed the laptop into the back of her uniform shirt and climbed into the shaft. The metal was cold against her hands. She descended as fast as she dared, Marcus right behind her, Davis last. Above them, Dmitry's voice echoed down the shaft in Russian. You can't run forever, Doctor. Victor owns this city. Owns the police. Owns the judges. You're going to give us that laptop, or you're going to die holding it. Subscribe now to see if Grace and Marcus survive the next 10 minutes. Where are you watching from? Comment below. They climbed down 5 floors in absolute darkness, their hands scraped raw, muscles screaming. Grace counted floor levels by the ventilation grates they passed. 46th. 45th. 44th. At the 42nd floor, she found the access door to the mechanical room. Kicked it open. They tumbled out into a space filled with massive air handling units, the mechanical heartbeat of the building. And found themselves face to face with Richard Chin. Marcus's attorney stood in the center of the room, suit pristine, expression apologetic. Behind him were 3 men in tactical gear with weapons raised. I'm sorry, Marcus, Richard said. I really am. But Victor made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Grace's hand instinctively moved to protect the laptop against her back. Richard noticed. That's what we came for, Dr. Morrison. The evidence. Victor's willing to let you both live if you hand it over. No one else needs to know about the contract problems. The deal closes tomorrow as planned. Everyone walks away. Except the thousands of people who'll die when Victor's weapons reach conflict zones, Grace said. Richard's expression hardened. That's not my problem. It will be when the FBI connects you to international arms trafficking, Marcus said, his voice cold. You're an accessory, Richard. To all of it. Only if there's evidence. Richard held out his hand. Give me the laptop, and this all ends. Davis raised his weapon, but the three tactical operators had better angles. They'd shoot him before he could fire. Grace looked at Marcus. At Davis. At the laptop that contained the only proof of Victor's scheme. At Richard Chen, a man who'd chosen money over morality. Then she did something unexpected. She pulled the laptop from her shirt, held it up, and threw it as hard as she could at the nearest air handling unit. The machine's massive fan blades shredded the laptop in 2 seconds, scattering metal and silicon across the mechanical room floor. Richard's face went pale. What have you done? Grace smiled. Destroyed your only problem. The evidence is gone. You stupid, Richard lunged forward, but Grace was already moving. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and sprayed it directly in Richard's face. White foam exploded everywhere. Davis shot out the lights. Darkness and chaos. Grace, Marcus, and Davis ran for the maintenance ladder while tactical operators shouted in confusion and Richard screamed about the destroyed laptop. They climbed down the ladder, 3 floors, 6 floors, 10 floors, hands slipping on the rungs, muscles burning, lungs heaving. At parking level 2, they hit solid ground. Davis's backup car, a nondescript Honda sedan, sat exactly where he'd left it for emergencies. They were inside and moving before Victor's men reached the mechanical room and discovered Grace's deception. The laptop, Marcus gasped as they sped out of the parking garage. You destroyed the only evidence. Grace pulled out her phone. On the screen was a completed file upload. I backed up everything to the cloud 20 minutes ago. The laptop was just hardware. The evidence is already with the FBI, the SEC, and 3 international regulatory agencies. Marcus started laughing. Stress and relief and disbelief all mixed together. Victor just destroyed an empty laptop while thinking he won, Grace said. But her smile faded as Davis spoke from the driver's seat. We have a bigger problem. The signing is in 7 hours. Even with the evidence you sent, it'll take the FBI days to process it and get arrest warrants. Victor will close the deal before they can stop him. Grace and Marcus exchanged looks in the darkness of the car. They had 7 hours to destroy Viktor Volkov's entire operation. And they were running out of miracles. Davis drove them to a motel on the outskirts of Chicago where rooms cost $40 a night and nobody asked questions. Grace sat on the edge of a bed that smelled like cigarettes and regret, her waitress uniform torn and blood-stained, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline crash. Marcus paced the small room like a caged animal. Davis stood guard at the window, watching the parking lot for signs they'd been followed. It was 3:30 in the morning. 5.5 hours until Victor's signing ceremony. Grace's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but she recognized the cadence immediately. Her former mentor, James Chen, now working international financial crimes for the State Department. Received your files. Holy hell, Grace. This is massive. But we have a problem. Grace called him immediately. James answered on the first ring, his voice tight with stress. Grace, where are you? Are you safe? Safe is relative. What's the problem? The problem is that Viktor Volkov has diplomatic credentials. He's registered as a Russian trade attaché. That gives him immunity from prosecution in the U.S. Grace felt the world tilt. You're telling me we have evidence of weapons trafficking, money laundering, sanctions violations, and fraud, and you can't touch him? Not without State Department approval, which requires political clearance that takes weeks. Maybe months. James's voice was bitter. I'm sorry, Grace. I believe you. The evidence is solid. But my hands are tied. What about the deal? Can you stop the signing? The contract is between two private companies. We can't interfere with legitimate business transactions without proof of imminent criminal activity. And Victor's smart, everything in that contract is technically legal in isolation. It's only when you combine the pieces across multiple jurisdictions that the picture becomes clear. Would you give up now, or would you keep fighting when the law fails you? Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Grace ended the call and threw her phone across the room. It hit the wall but didn't break. "We're out of options," she said. "Victor has diplomatic immunity. The FBI can't stop the signing. Even with all our evidence, he walks." Marcus stopped pacing. "No. What? I didn't build my company for 20 years just to let some Russian criminal destroy it." Marcus pulled out his own phone. If the government can't stop him, maybe the court of public opinion can. He started making calls. First to his media director. Then to 3 journalists he'd cultivated relationships with over the years. Then to every business contact who owed him favors. Grace watched in amazement as Marcus Wellington, the arrogant billionaire who'd mocked her in multiple languages 12 hours ago, transformed into a man willing to sacrifice his own reputation to expose the truth. "I need you to leak something," he said into the phone. "My merger with Chin Technologies. Make it a scandal. Say there are questions about the deal's legitimacy. National security concerns. Get it trending before 9 this morning." Grace's lawyer brain kicked in. "Marcus, if you publicly attack the deal, Victor will sue you for breach of contract. Tortious interference. You'll lose millions even if you're right. Then I lose millions." Marcus's eyes met hers. "You lost your entire career to stop Victor 3 years ago. I can lose some money to stop him now." Davis spoke from the window without turning around. "We have movement. 2 cars just pulled into the lot. SUVs. Tinted windows. They've been found." Grace grabbed her phone and Marcus's arm. "Back door. Now." They ran through the motel's dingy hallway, past vending machines and peeling wallpaper, out into the pre-dawn darkness. Davis's backup motorcycle, a Ducati he'd stashed behind the dumpster, was their only option. Grace had never been on a motorcycle in her life. "Hold on tight," Davis said as she climbed on behind him, Marcus taking his own bike that had been hidden next to the dumpster. They roared out of the parking lot seconds before Victor's men kicked in the motel room door. The sun was just starting to rise over Chicago as they weaved through early morning traffic. Grace's mind raced faster than the motorcycle. Victor had diplomatic immunity. The FBI couldn't act fast enough. Public pressure wouldn't stop a man who'd spent 3 years planning this revenge. They needed something bigger. Something Victor couldn't control or buy his way out of. Then it hit her. The signing ceremony. Grace shouted over the wind. "Where is it being held?" Marcus pulled up alongside them at a red light. "The Drake Hotel. Private conference room. Invitation only." Grace's legal mind saw the angle. Invitation only means private event. But it's still on American soil. If we can get inside, if we can make Victor confess to something on American soil without his diplomatic immunity protecting him, he becomes prosecutable, Marcus finished. But how do we get him to confess? Grace smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "We speak his language." By 6:30 in the morning, Grace had made 4 calls. First to James at the State Department, feeding him a plan he initially called insane. Second to an FBI agent she'd worked with years ago who owed her a favor. Third to a former colleague at the ACLU who specialized in diplomatic immunity cases. Fourth to her grandmother, just to hear her voice one more time in case this all went sideways. Subscribe now because what happens in the next 3 hours will determine everything. Where are you watching from? Comment below. At 7:15, Grace walked into a Chicago department store the moment it opened. She bought a business suit that cost more than 2 weeks of her waitress salary. Transformed herself from fugitive to professional in 20 minutes. Marcus did the same. They both looked like people who belonged at a billion-dollar signing ceremony. At 8:45, they walked into the Drake Hotel like they owned it. The conference room was exactly what Grace expected: crystal chandeliers, mahogany tables, men in expensive suits celebrating what they thought was a done deal. Viktor Volkov stood at the center of it all, holding court, his smile predatory and satisfied. He saw Grace and Marcus enter. His smile faltered for just a second. Then his lawyer approached Grace, blocking her path. "Dr. Morrison. You're not on the guest list. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Actually," Grace said in perfect Russian, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I'm here as Mr. Wellington's chief legal counsel. He has concerns about the contract that need to be addressed before signing." The room went silent. Victor's expression shifted from surprise to fury to something that looked like respect. "Dr. Morrison. You're persistent, I'll give you that. But this deal is closing. You've lost." "Have I?" Grace pulled out a tablet. "Because I have some questions about the subsidiary transfer protocols. In Russian, since that's your preferred language for business." She began speaking rapid Russian, asking pointed questions about the clauses she'd discovered. Victor had to respond or look suspicious to his own investors. He answered in Russian, trying to deflect. Grace switched to Mandarin, addressing the Chinese investors directly, pointing out discrepancies Victor thought were hidden. Then to Japanese. Then Arabic. Then German. She was conducting a linguistic ambush in 6 languages simultaneously, forcing Victor to respond to each accusation, each question carefully designed to make him admit things he'd never confess in English. And every word was being recorded by the FBI agents posing as hotel staff throughout the room. Victor realized it too late. He'd been so focused on answering Grace's questions that he hadn't noticed the people around him weren't all investors. Weren't all on his side. "You're wearing a wire," he said in Russian, his voice deadly quiet. "No," Grace replied in the same language. "They're wearing wires. Every staff member you ignored because they were beneath your notice. Every person you assumed didn't matter." Victor's hand moved toward his phone, probably to call his security team. But FBI agents were already moving in, shedding their service disguises, badges out. "Viktor Volkov, you're under arrest for conspiracy to violate international sanctions, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to traffic weapons. Your diplomatic credentials have been revoked by the Russian consulate as of 6:45 this morning." Victor's face went white. "That's impossible. I have immunity." "You had immunity," Grace said quietly. "Until I sent the Russian consulate evidence that you've been conducting unauthorized business operations in their name. They revoked your credentials 45 minutes ago. You're just a criminal now. No protection. No immunity." Victor looked at Grace with pure hatred. "You've destroyed me." "No," Grace said. "I've stopped you. There's a difference." As FBI agents led Victor away in handcuffs, Marcus stood beside Grace, watching the man who tried to destroy them both finally face consequences. "Is it really over?" he asked. Grace watched Victor being read his rights in 3 languages he'd used as weapons. "Yes," she said. "It's really over." But the sun was only just beginning to rise on what came next. The FBI took Viktor Volkov out of the Drake Hotel in handcuffs, but Grace didn't feel victorious. She felt exhausted. Hollowed out. Like someone had reached inside her and taken everything that had kept her moving for the past 14 hours. Marcus stood beside her in the emptying conference room, watching investors scatter like cockroaches when lights turn on. The Chin Technologies representatives were already on phones with their attorneys. The signing table, covered in unsigned contracts, looked like a crime scene. "Grace," Marcus said quietly. "You need to sit down." She realized she was swaying. When was the last time she'd eaten? Yesterday's lunch break at the Azure Room, 17 hours ago. Marcus guided her to a chair. A hotel staff member, who Grace now realized might still be an FBI agent, brought her water and coffee. She drank both without tasting them. James Chen appeared in the doorway, his State Department credentials visible on his belt. He looked older than Grace remembered, more gray hair, deeper lines around his eyes. But his smile was genuine. "Dr. Morrison," he said formally, then dropped the pretense and hugged her. "Grace. You brilliant, reckless, terrifying woman. Do you have any idea what you just pulled off? Stopped an international arms trafficking operation." Grace's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Saved Marcus's company. Got Victor arrested. You dismantled a criminal network that spans 6 countries." James sat down across from her. Victor's arrest triggered a cascade. Russian authorities just raided 3 of his shell companies. Chinese regulators froze accounts tied to Chen Technologies. The German Federal Criminal Police arrested his European banking contacts an hour ago. Marcus was staring at Grace like he'd never seen her before. All of that from one contract review. All of that from Grace recognizing a pattern, James corrected. She's done this before. 3 years ago, she took down a different part of Victor's network. Cost him $200 million. That's why he destroyed her career. She was the only person who'd ever successfully stopped him. If someone destroyed your career for doing the right thing, would you risk everything to do it again? Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Grace's phone buzzed. A number she hadn't seen in 2 years. Her former senior partner at Morrison & Associates, the man who'd filed the false ethics complaint that ended her legal career. She answered. "Mr. Morrison. Dr. Morrison." His voice was stiff, formal, ashamed. "I'm calling to inform you that the ethics investigation into your conduct has been officially closed. All charges dismissed with prejudice. Your law license has been fully reinstated as of 9:14 this morning." Grace couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. "Viktor Volkov approached me 2 years ago," Morrison continued, his words rushing out like confession. "He offered my firm $5 million to file a complaint against you. Provided fabricated evidence. Coached witnesses. I knew it was wrong. But $5 million. He paused. "I'm sorry, Grace. I destroyed your career for money. And I've regretted it every day since. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Victor's arrest triggered an FBI investigation into everyone he's done business with. Including me. I'm cooperating fully. Returning the money. Probably going to lose my license." Morrison's laugh was bitter. "Turns out there are consequences after all. Who knew?" Grace ended the call without responding. "Your license?" Marcus asked. "They reinstated your license?" "Apparently." "Grace, do you understand what this means? You're a lawyer again. You can practice. You can." "I can finally stop being a waitress," Grace said, and started laughing. It wasn't happy laughter. It was the sound of 2 years of pain and humiliation and hiding finally breaking open. Marcus let her laugh. Let her cry. Let her be human for the first time since she'd walked into the Azure Room yesterday evening wearing a uniform that made her invisible. When Grace finally pulled herself together, James was holding out a folder. "What's this?" "Victor's full confession," James said. "He started talking in the FBI van. Trying to cut a deal. He gave up everyone, his partners, his financial backers, his clients. Including the names of 47 people whose careers he destroyed over the past decade." Grace opened the folder. Saw her own name on the list. Saw dozens of others, professors, journalists, lawyers, activists. All people who'd gotten too close to the truth. All people Victor had systematically ruined. He kept records, James continued. Documented every accusation he fabricated, every witness he paid off, every career he demolished. It's all evidence now. Why would he document his own crimes? Insurance, Marcus said quietly. If anyone ever came after him, he could threaten to expose everyone he'd compromised. Mutually assured destruction. Except Grace didn't care about being destroyed, James said. She'd already lost everything. Victor's leverage didn't work on someone with nothing left to lose. Grace stared at the list of names. 47 lives. Some of them had survived like she had. Others hadn't. 3 names had death dates next to them, suicides, all within a year of their careers being destroyed. These people deserve justice, she said. They're going to get it, James assured her. The FBI is reaching out to every name on that list. Offering them the evidence to clear their names. Vindication. Subscribe now to see the incredible conclusion of this story. Where are you watching from? Comment below. But Grace was already thinking ahead. Vindication isn't enough. They need their lives back. Their careers. Their reputations. Grace, you can't save everyone. Watch me. Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted to confusion. It's my board of directors. All of them. Conference call. He answered on speaker. This is Marcus. Mr. Wellington, his board chairman said, his voice formal. We've been monitoring the situation with the Chen Technologies merger. We've reviewed the evidence Dr. Morrison uncovered. We've consulted with legal counsel. Marcus braced himself for bad news. We're voting unanimously to offer Dr. Grace Morrison the position of Chief Legal Officer and Executive Vice President of Wellington Technologies. Salary and benefits package to be negotiated at her convenience. We believe the company owes her a considerable debt. Grace's mouth fell open. Additionally, the chairman continued, we're authorizing a $10 million fund to assist the other 46 individuals affected by Mr. Volkov's criminal activities. Legal fees, financial support, career rehabilitation. Dr. Morrison will administer the fund as she sees fit. Marcus was grinning. I think that's a board decision I can support. Grace tried to form words. Failed. Tried again. I just wanted to serve tables and survive. You did a lot more than survive, Marcus said. You saved my company. Stopped an international weapons trafficking ring. And exposed one of the most sophisticated criminal operations in recent history. I'd say that qualifies you for a promotion from waitress. James stood up, preparing to leave. Grace, I need to get back to Washington. But before I go, the State Department is putting together a task force to investigate international white-collar crime. We need someone who understands how these networks operate. Someone who speaks 9 languages. Someone who's proven they can't be intimidated or bought. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a choice. Private sector with Marcus. Public sector with us. Or, he smiled, start your own firm representing people like you. People who got destroyed for telling the truth. Grace looked at Marcus, who raised his hands in surrender. Whatever you choose, the $10 million fund is yours to manage. And you'll always have a place at Wellington Technologies. 3 job offers. After 2 years of not being able to get hired to clean bathrooms. Grace didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at Chicago's downtown skyline. Somewhere out there was the Azure Room, where she'd been invisible yesterday. Somewhere out there were 46 people who needed someone to fight for them the way no one had fought for her. She turned back to Marcus and James. I want to start a firm, she said. Specializing in representing professionals who've been wrongfully accused or destroyed by powerful interests. I'll use the fund to finance it. No fees for clients who can't afford it. Marcus smiled. That sounds like you. What are you going to call it? Grace thought about the past 2 years. About being invisible. About being underestimated. About speaking 9 languages in a world that assumed she spoke none. Morrison Global Advocacy, she said. Because no one should have to hide who they are to survive. James extended his hand. If you ever need State Department resources, you call me. Marcus did the same. If you ever need financing or corporate support, Wellington Technologies has your back. Grace shook both their hands. Felt the weight of possibility settling on her shoulders. Felt like herself for the first time in 2 years. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. You may have won this time, Dr. Morrison. But I have friends. People who will finish what I started. Watch your back. Victor. From his holding cell. Grace showed the message to James, who immediately forwarded it to the FBI as evidence of witness intimidation. But Grace wasn't afraid anymore. Because she'd learned something in the past 24 hours. The most dangerous person in any room isn't the one with the most money or power. It's the one with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. And Grace Morrison had just found 46 more people to fight for. Viktor Volkov had created his own worst nightmare. A lawyer who spoke 9 languages and had absolutely nothing to fear. 8 months later, Grace Morrison stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window on the 32nd floor of the Chicago Board of Trade building, watching snowfall dust Michigan Avenue below. Her new office didn't have the same view she'd had at Morrison and Associates before everything fell apart. But it was hers. Earned. Built from nothing. The brass nameplate beside the door read, Morrison Global Advocacy, Dr. Grace Morrison, founding partner. Behind her, the conference room hummed with quiet conversation. 23 of the 47 people on Victor's list had flown to Chicago for this gathering. The others had joined by video conference, their faces displayed on screens along the wall. They'd all had their names cleared. Their records expunged. Their reputations restored. But restoration wasn't enough. That's why Grace had called this meeting. Thank you all for coming, Grace said in English, then repeated it in Spanish, Mandarin, and Arabic for those who'd joined from other countries. 8 months ago, we were all victims of the same man. Today, we're something different. She pulled up a presentation on the screen. Morrison Global Advocacy has handled 63 cases in the past 8 months. We've cleared 18 wrongfully accused professionals. We've recovered $42 million in damages from corporations that tried to silence whistleblowers. We've gotten 12 people reinstated to positions they were illegally terminated from. Applause rippled through the room. But the work isn't finished, Grace continued. For every person on Victor's list, there are hundreds more who've been destroyed by powerful people and don't have the resources to fight back. That's why I'm proposing we expand. She clicked to the next slide. Morrison Global Advocacy is opening offices in 6 cities, New York, Los Angeles, London, Tokyo, Berlin, and Dubai. Each office will specialize in a different region's legal frameworks. Each will be led by someone from this room. Someone who knows what it's like to be destroyed for telling the truth. The room erupted in excited murmurs. Grace's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, turn on channel 7. Now. She grabbed the remote and switched one of the conference screens to the news. A reporter stood outside a federal courthouse, snow falling around her. Breaking news in the Viktor Volkov trial. After 8 months of testimony from 47 victims, the jury has reached a verdict on all counts. The room went silent. Everyone stared at the screen. The news cut to footage of the courtroom. Viktor Volkov stood beside his attorney, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide how much he'd aged in 8 months. The arrogance was gone. The predatory confidence had evaporated. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to violate international sanctions? Guilty. Count after count. Guilty. 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 38 counts total. Every single one returned as guilty. The camera caught Victor's face as the verdict was read. No emotion. Just the hollow expression of someone who'd finally run out of money to buy his way free. Grace's conference room exploded in cheers. People hugged. Some cried. Dr. Jennifer Park, the Stanford professor who'd served 3 years on fabricated charges before Victor's confession cleared her, raised her glass. To Grace Morrison, she said in Korean, then English. The woman who refused to stay silent. Everyone drank. Grace tried to smile, but her mind was already 3 steps ahead. Victor was convicted. But there were others like him. Other powerful people who destroyed lives for profit and ego. The work was never really done. Her phone rang. Marcus Wellington. Did you see? He asked. We're watching it now. Grace, there's something else you should know. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month. The prosecution is asking for 45 years. But Victor's attorney just filed a motion. Grace's stomach tightened. What kind of motion? He wants to make a statement. In court. Specifically to you. Why? I don't know. But the judge approved it. Victor gets 10 minutes to address you directly before sentencing. Grace ended the call and looked at the faces in her conference room. These were people who'd survived Victor's attacks. People who'd rebuilt their lives from ashes. He wants to talk to me, she said. At the sentencing hearing. Dr. Park spoke first. Don't go. Don't give him the satisfaction. But Grace shook her head. I have to. Whatever he wants to say, I need to hear it. Subscribe now because the final confrontation between Grace and Victor will change everything. Where are you watching from? Comment below. For weeks later, Grace sat in a federal courtroom wearing a navy suit and the confidence of someone who'd won everything and lost nothing that mattered. Victor was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. He'd lost at least 30 pounds. His hair had gone completely gray. He looked like a man who'd aged a decade in 8 months. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who presided over the entire trial, gestured to Victor. Mr. Volkov, you have 10 minutes. Use them wisely. Victor stood. Looked directly at Grace. Dr. Morrison, he said in English, his Russian accent thicker than she remembered. For 3 years, I've hated you. Blamed you for exposing my operation. Destroying my business. Ruining my life. Grace kept her expression neutral. But sitting in a cell for 8 months gives you time to think, Victor continued. Time to understand what you really did. You didn't destroy my business. You stopped me from destroying hundreds more lives. You didn't ruin me. I ruined myself. He paused, and for the first time since Grace had met him, he looked genuinely human. I kept records of every person I destroyed because I was proud of it. Proud of my power. My control. I thought wealth made me invincible. Thought speaking multiple languages made me smarter than everyone else. Thought people like you, he gestured to Grace in her waitress uniform from that night, which she'd deliberately worn today, were beneath me. I was wrong about everything. And the worst part is that you tried to stop me 3 years ago. If I'd listened then, if I'd admitted my crimes and accepted consequences, 44 more people wouldn't have suffered. 3 people wouldn't have died. Grace's jaw tightened. The 3 suicides on Victor's list. Names she'd memorized. Lives she couldn't save. I don't expect forgiveness, Victor said. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know something. Everything I took from you, your career, your reputation, your future, you took back by being better than me. Stronger. More resilient. More just. He looked at the judge. I'm ready for sentencing. Whatever years I have left, I'll spend them knowing that the woman I tried to destroy became the thing I feared most, someone who couldn't be silenced, bought, or broken. The judge nodded. Mr. Volkov, I hereby sentence you to 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. You will also forfeit all assets acquired through criminal enterprise, totaling approximately $1.8 billion. These funds will be distributed to your victims as restitution. Victor was led away. He didn't look back. Grace walked out of the courthouse into brilliant sunshine. Marcus was waiting on the steps, along with 20 members of her new firm. How do you feel? Marcus asked. Grace thought about it. About the past 3 years. About being destroyed and rebuilt. About going from a corner office to a waitress uniform to a new corner office earned on her own terms. I feel like I can finally breathe, she said. That evening, Grace returned to the Azure room for the first time since the night everything changed. The maitre d' recognized her immediately. Dr. Morrison. Welcome back. Your usual table. Actually, Grace said, I'd like to sit in the private dining room. Where it all started. She was led to the same room where Marcus Wellington had mocked her in 3 languages. The same table where she'd overheard a billion-dollar trap. The same place where she'd decided that staying silent wasn't survival, it was surrender. Marcus joined her 10 minutes later, along with Dr. Park, James Chen, and 15 others from the victims' list who'd flown to Chicago for the sentencing. They ordered champagne. The same Dom Perignon that had been on Marcus's table that first night. When everyone had a glass, Grace stood. A toast, she said in English, then repeated it in 8 other languages. To everyone who's ever been underestimated. To everyone who's ever been silenced. To everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. You belong everywhere. You matter everywhere. And your voice, she smiled, especially in languages they think you don't speak, is the most powerful weapon in the world. They drank. And Grace Morrison, former waitress, former disgraced lawyer, current founder of one of the fastest-growing advocacy firms in the world, finally allowed herself to believe that justice wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. As long as someone was brave enough to speak up. Even when everyone assumed she wouldn't understand a word.